Hey guys, so in this video we are going to use After Effects to composite multiple stilled image sequences. So first we have After Effects open. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to drag one of the files over, and in these folders we actually can see we have all our images to get that nice turntable. So I'm going to first drag in the clay render. And the nice thing about After Effects is it's going to automatically make a composition to this size and time frame once I drag it into the layers. So let's actually bring in our wire turntable. So here you can see in that folder we have all those wireframes. Let's just drag it over. Give it a second. And so now we have our two image sequences as assets in our project. So let's create a composition. Oops. And just grab the clay and drag it into our layers. And you can see it made a composition. It automatically called the composition clay because that's what the first asset we dropped in was. So now let's grab the wire and just put that on top. Oops, put it here, and then just bring it above that clay layer. So this works just like Photoshop. We have our clay at the bottom, our wire on top, so you can see the wire is superseding the top. And let me go ahead and full screen this now that we don't need these assets anymore. Okay, here we go. So we got our assets in, and now what we want to do is basically like in Photoshop, we want to composite this wireframe on top of that clay so we can see the wireframe over our clay render. So what you want to make sure you do is you come down to modes and you see where it says normal. These are our blending modes in After Effects. If you don't see this by default, it's because you have to come down here and hit toggle switches / mode. So I think by default After Effects will keep it like this. So you'll see menus like this. But just hit this toggle switches / modes button. And now you can see we have our blending modes. So just like Photoshop, I'm going to go to our wire layer and I'm going to set this to multiply. Excuse me. Oh, where are you? Here it is. So we have that's now composited on there nicely. So if we scrub through, so remember it has to load each frame into RAM, and you get this green bar on top. That means it's loaded into RAM. So that's why it's not going to play back smoothly right now. It has to calculate what we just did. So this is pretty cool. The cool thing about doing this in After Effects is it's moving, it's a video, so that means we can actually do some cool tricks to get this wireframe to kind of fade in on top of our clay. So we can do one turnaround as a clay render, a second turnaround, and the wireframe will fade in on top of it, and then we can fade out for our third turnaround. But you might be wondering, well, we only rendered out one 360 in 3ds Max. That's correct, but with the power of After Effects, and just so as long as your animation that you render out of 3ds Max is a complete solid 360, you can actually take that one turntable and make it as long as you want, so you can spin it indefinitely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select our clay asset in our project. Let's right click and let's go to interpret footage, main. And at the bottom of this window that pops up, you see it says loop. We have it looped to 1 times. Let's go ahead and set that to 3. Hit OK. We don't see anything change here. That's because our composition is only going to 10 seconds because I only have 300 frames rendered. For you guys, it will be 100 frames, so 3.3 seconds. So what we want to do is basically if we want 3 loops, we want to make our composition 3 times longer so we can see all 3 loops. So I'm going to go to composition. Oops, first you notice I go to composition, I can't select this. We have to select the composition in our assets area. So I select this, and you can tell it's the composition by this icon. And then I'll go to composition, composition settings. So in here, you can see I have my duration. So I can simply do 3 times 10 seconds. So this is going to be 30. And then I'll just make it perfect. So there you go. So for you guys, it will be 3.3 times 3. And that's what your duration will be. So I'll hit OK. And we still don't see anything. But if you notice, this upper bar right here, it stops at 10. So basically, all we're seeing in our layers is from here to here. We can adjust that by grabbing the end where this blue handle is and just dragging it all the way to the end. And now you can see 30 seconds in our timeline. So we looped our clay layer 3 times, but it still kind of stops at this first time. That's because it's going to loop it, but we have to like drag right here and tell it, okay, we want you to be visible from here. So you can actually change like the visibility by moving this. So this one we can move it in the wire layer, but we can't move it this way because there's no footage. It doesn't interpret that footage as looping, so we can't just drag it out. So for the wireframe, we'll go select our wireframe asset, right click, interpret footage, main, and we will set it to loop 3 times. And then we should be able to see what it's doing at the bottom. So I'll hit 3, OK. And bam, it goes to 30. And again, we just have to drag it out so it reads that. Okay. Now let's do some cool fade in and fade out. So it's going to take a minute for this stuff to all kind of run through and load into RAM if I were to hit play right now. But it's not a bad idea to preview your animations in Turntables in this instance to see what it's doing. Make sure everything is on the screen. The wing isn't getting cropped out, for example. The pedestal is nice and centered. So you can just kind of, I would recommend doing a quick turntable, even just the clay render, just to see, make sure its composition is looking good. So I'm not going to let this play out now, but you can kind of see it's turning. So if we kind of scrub through it quickly, we can tell that this wireframe is on top of the clay the whole time. So in After Effects, we can actually do Keyframe Animation on our objects. So we can move them, scale them, rotate them, but we can also keyframe things like opacity. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to keyframe the opacity of our wireframe layer so that it fades in nicely and then fades out nicely. So we're going to do a clay turn, then we're going to fade in the wireframe and do a wireframe turn, and then we're going to fade out the wireframe and go back to a clay turn. So that's why I looped the animation 3 times. So I know about 10 seconds, that's where my turntable stops, right? That was the first turntable, or complete 360. So I'll go to my wire transform, and you can see we have this opacity setting, or if you just want to see the opacity so it's like less clutter, you can just select the layer, hit T, and I kind of remember T for transparency in After Effects. So transparency, opacity, so T, and then you can just see this opacity layer. So what I'm going to do is at layer 10, I'm going to keyframe it. So to enable keyframes, you select this stopwatch. Boom. So right now here it's keyed at 100. We'll see no change because it's been 100. So I'll set this to 0 with this key on. So set it to 0, and now you notice it's gone. So if I want to bring it back, this is kind of like my holding key. I have to tell After Effects from here to here you're going to be 0. And then from here to, let's say, 11 seconds for now. That's probably too long, but we can see what's going on. So I'll go to my 11 seconds, and I'm going to tell After Effects, so at frame 10, you're at 0. Basically, from 0 to 10, it's at 0. And I'm going to fade it from 10 seconds to 11 seconds. That wireframe layer is going to fade in. So I still have this checked, and it's at 0. I can just move my slider to 11 seconds, and I'll crank this up to 100. So if we kind of scrub through here, about halfway, you can see that wireframe is half as intense because it's 0 at frame 10, and then it's slowly creeping in. And actually, 1 second, that's not a bad transition. So I take that back what I said a little bit earlier. So let's do the same for fading out. So basically, 0 to 10, it's at 0 opacity. 10 to 11, it's fading in at 100% opacity. So we want to keep it at 100% opacity until frame 20, because that's where my second turnaround should be. So at frame 20, I need to add another, I call these holding keys. So I'll just enter 100 again, or sometimes it doesn't like that because you can see it didn't drop a key here. So sometimes I'll just bump it down and then bump it back up to 100, and that puts my key. So now it's holding from frame 11 to 20 at 100% opacity. So I'm going to go to 21 seconds, and this is where it's going to go back to 0. So from 20 to 21 seconds, it's going to fade to 0 opacity. There we go. Okay, so now you can see it's at 0 opacity here, fades in nicely, and then it starts fading out, and then it's 0. So I'm going to either speed this video up or just chop it and bring it back when this is done, but I'm going to let this go so you guys can see what's going on. Okay, so all the frames are loaded into RAM. We get this nice smooth preview of what our video is going to look like, and you can see how nice these transitions are. So this is just a way to elevate your turntables so you don't it's elegant. So that's why we do this. We don't typically like hard transitions unless you're going for a certain style in your demo reel, you're consciously using like hard cuts or whatever. But typically for starting out, you kind of want to do something more in line with this until you start defining your own personal style. So we got that. I do want to point out my clay material. You can see how I added reflections to it. So I basically just made the reflect color white, and I dropped that glossiness value to something like 0.7. The reflective glossiness is what I dropped. I dropped it to 0.7 or 0.75 or something, just because I didn't want reflections that were too strong. But I do think it's nice to see the body lines, the reflections in the body lines. That just gives it more depth. So you want to do that for when you render out your plane. So I'll put that in the PowerPoint though. Call that out. I think this looks good. Yeah. So let's send this to Adobe Media Encoder. So I'll just File, Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder, and then I'll wait for that guy to pop up, and then follow those steps. One more thing I did want to show you guys before we actually hop into Media Encoder is if we wanted to adjust like these layers, we could go to bring up adjustment layers in here. So these are like effects and presets. So let's say we want to change the curves or the levels. We can start typing that in here, color correction curves. And I can just drag this. I can either drag it on one of these layers, or I should be able to, I think I got to create a new layer. Right click, new adjustment layer. There we go. So this is basically a blank layer on top of this these two layers. So now I can drag my curves into adjustment layer. And here, my project assets kind of switch to effects. So I have my curves. So if we wanted to, this is how you can start getting into some like deeper compositing, just tweaking the scene. So if I toggle this on and off, you can kind of see what it's doing. It's kind of adding more contrast. Just a simple S-curve. It's adding more contrast to the scene. So I already sent my project to Media Encoder though, so this won't be in there. But I just wanted to show you guys how you can start using some of these adjustment layers. And pretty much any of the adjustment layers in Photoshop you can find in After Effects. But After Effects has a bunch more just because it's dealing with video footage as well. So that's pretty cool. So you can kind of see the similarities between After Effects and Photoshop. It's really not that hard to get into After Effects. Alright, so let's jump into Media Encoder. So here I have my exported video. And remember guys, this is super easy. All I need to do is set my destination. So let's go to, where did I put this guy? I think it's on my network drive. And let's just call this one plain TTN. So I'll save it. And it should throw it there. And all I need to do after I set the output file is hit this green play button. By default, it's nice. .mp4 uses the H.264 compression settings. Those are set up, or format, and uses the good compression settings in that. So we just wait for this, and then it will kick out a video, and then that's your video. So I'm not going to wait for this to go, but your video will pop up where you saved it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's kind of a long process. It's not too long though. Once you understand the steps, you can just fly through this quickly. So, alright, that's all I got for you guys. Have a good day.